Hello and welcome to what may be the final video in the current series. I've been going over passages in the Confucian Analects, and I'm recording two addendums or addenda on some other classic texts in the Confucian tradition, the Great Learning, that was the last video, and the Mencius in this video. For the lower right-hand corner of the screen, a picture I snapped on, what's it called, High West. Name of a hill or a mountain on Hong Kong Island. We're looking, I don't know, northwest, I suppose. I'm thinking Kowloon is off that way somewhere. Disneyland might be somewhere around here. And the foreground is all Hong Kong Island. Anyway, let's relegate that to its corner and talk about the Mencius. Now, I think a better pronunciation would be Mencius, but I'm sure even that is flawed. Mencius is a perfectly acceptable English pronunciation of the name as it has been translated into English. So, Mencius. Mencius is a major philosopher in the Confucian tradition. Mencius is maybe the most important Confucian philosopher after Confucius himself. And, well, I suppose the ancient picture there is the same as on the cover of this volume. This is the Irene Bloom translation published by Columbia University Press. This is a very fine translation. All right, the Mencius is, well, it's the Mencius book. It's, well, I don't know that it would be completely wrong to say it's written by Mencius, but I think, like the Analects, it's probably better to say that it is a collection of anecdotes about Mencius and sayings of Mencius organized by his followers. Anyway, Mencius is famous for arguing that human nature is a fundamentally good thing. Now, please don't misunderstand this. The word nature gets tricky the way we've come to use the term. Mencius thinks human nature includes a fundamental disposition to good behavior, including benevolent and just behavior. Again, don't misunderstand this fundamental disposition. It doesn't mean we do good automatically. It doesn't mean no one does bad. Nature here doesn't mean what happens automatically or what happens if there's no intervention. It means what's built into us. If it helps, I think the Aristotelian idea of the proper function of the human being is perfectly appropriate for adding to an understanding of Mencius, for understanding how this kind of thought works. There are, as I am fond of pointing out, more correspondences between someone like Aristotle in the West and someone in the East like Confucius or Mencius than you find between someone like Aristotle in the West and someone like Sartre in the West, though I do kind of like Sartre and I need to do more videos on Sartre at some point. All right, so the better approach than just using Aristotle to understand Mencius, the better approach is working with Mencius' own illustration, the seedling or the sprout. So let's just briefly mention one of the examples. In fact, let me see if I can track down the example for you. Let's pause to locate the example. All right, I pulled it up in 3 different translations. Now, first, let's briefly look at the public domain translation from James Legge. ctext.org is a good place where you can find the Legge translations with the original Chinese script. All right, so the example Mencius gives of this fundamental disposition to good behavior is, think of a child about to fall into a well, or for a contemporary application, if you're not accustomed to living near dangerous wells, I would say think of a child about to fall into the tracks at the train station. And Mencius says, everyone has a heart or a mind that instinctively feels distress when we see a child about to fall into a well. We're worried about it, we're concerned, and not just because we want to save the day and have everyone recognize how awesome we are. It's not just so we can get a reward from the child's parents or public acclaim. Quite independently of that, we have some feeling of distress and concern for the child, some interest in helping the child. To not have this is to not even be human anymore. So, I was going to look at the text, wasn't I? All men have a mind which cannot bear to see the sufferings of others. When I say that all men have a mind which cannot bear to see the sufferings of others, my meaning may be illustrated thus. Even nowadays, and these are not the best days, I haven't mentioned this yet, Mencius is living in what's called the Warring States period. The Warring States period in the history of ancient China. I believe there is still a Zhou dynasty emperor, but his power is waning. Things are not going well. This is a worse time to be alive than Confucius' own time. Oh, I haven't mentioned when. This is also ancient China, but sometime after Confucius. Anyway, when I say that all men have a mind which cannot bear to see the suffering of others, my meaning may be illustrated thus. Even nowadays, if men suddenly see a child about to fall into a well, they will, without exception, experience a feeling of alarm and distress, not as a ground on which they may gain the favor of the child's parents, nor as a ground on which they seek the praise of their neighbors and friends, nor from a dislike to the reputation of having been unmoved by such a thing. From this feeling, from this case, from this situation, we may perceive that the feeling of commiseration is essential to man. The feeling of shame and dislike is essential to man, that the feeling of modesty and complacence is essential to man, that the feeling of approving and disapproving is essential to man. The feeling of commiseration is the principle of benevolence. That's that key word from Confucianism. Yan. Benevolence, humaneness, humanity, kindness, perfect virtue. Feeling of shame and dislike is the principle of righteousness or justice. Righteousness, justice, rightness. The feeling of modesty and complacence is the principle of propriety. I dare say that's the word lai, ritual or rite, but don't quote me on that unless we track down the vocabulary word. The feeling of approving and disapproving is the principle of knowledge, and I pretty much guarantee that'll be this word. See, pardon my bad pronunciation, knowledge or wisdom. Men have these four principles just as they have their four limbs. Now, note that it is possible to develop these principles or to not develop them. They need to be developed. And if they are, that will suffice to love and protect all within the four C's. All right, so what we have is not an automatic disposition to do what's right. A disposition to do what's right. We have is not an unavoidable inevitability of doing right. What we have is built into us a feeling which, if properly developed, can become a virtue. The existence of that feeling within us is like a seedling or a sprout. We have built in a tendency to have this feeling, and if we properly develop that, then when it reaches its full potential, then we have these virtues of benevolence, yan, yi, righteousness, justice, lai, ritual, right, knowledge, ji, ji. Now turning to the Muller translation, not public domain, but conveniently on the internet, Muller. Even nowadays, if an infant were about to fall into a well, anyone would be upset and concerned. This concern would not be due to the fact that the person wanted to get in the good graces of the infant's parents, etc., nor would it be because he's afraid of the criticism, etc., of not caring. If you did lack concern for the infant, you would not be human. Also, to lack a sense of shame and disgust would not be human. To lack a feeling of humility and deference is to be inhuman, and to lack a sense of right and wrong is to be inhuman. And this sense of concern for others is the starting point of humaneness. There's that word, lai. Humaneness is how Muller is translating it here. Sorry, not lai, ren, yan, not lai, yan, that keyword, yan. Humaneness. The feeling of shame and disgust is the starting point of fairness, so that'll be justice. Let's see. Okay, sorry, where was I? I'm just making sure we're keeping track of the vocabulary as well as we reasonably can, as well as I reasonably can with my limitations. I don't actually know this language as such. Okay, so Chinese script. English translation, the sense of concern for others is the starting point of humaneness, that's yan. The feeling of shame and disgust is the starting point of fairness, that's justice, righteousness, yi, here. The sense of humility and deference is the starting point of propriety, that's lai, li, sometimes translated ritual or right, R-I-T-E, and the sense of right and wrong is the starting point of wisdom, there, wisdom, see. So these four virtues are listed here, and their starting point is like having built-in limbs. But you know, when you're born, your arms aren't this long, and you can't just do all these things at will and do what's useful. I can't use my arms to eat cup noodles and drink tea when I'm a tiny baby. My arms need to grow and develop, and this feeling also has to be grown and developed and exercised. Having the four basic senses, etc., etc., etc. It's like having four limbs, claiming inability to be good. If you have these things built into you, which you do, if you're still human, is silly. You have an ability to be good. You just have to exercise these things. Now, maybe I'll mention one more vocabulary point. All people have a heart that cannot stand to see the suffering of others. That would be, I believe, this word. Sometimes translated heart, sometimes translated mind. I think leg translated mind, and Mother's translating it heart. We have mind here in the Irene Bloom translation. All human beings have a mind that cannot bear to see the suffering of others, etc. Now, if anyone were suddenly to see a child about to fall into a well, his mind would be filled with alarm, distress, pity, and compassion. Then he would react accordingly is not, because he would hope to use the opportunity to ingratiate himself with the child's parents, etc. One who lacks a mind that feels pity and compassion would not be human. The mind's feeling of pity and compassion is the sprout of humaneness. The mind's feeling of shame and aversion is the sprout of rightness. The mind's feeling of shame, the mind's feeling of modesty and compliance is the sprout of propriety. The mind's sense of right and wrong is the sprout of wisdom. Sprout of wisdom, starting point of wisdom. Principle of wisdom. I don't know if the camera will properly capture this nice paragraph in this translation by Irene Bloom, but perhaps it is. Looks clear enough on my computer screen. Human beings have these four sprouts, just as they have four limbs. For to have these four sprouts, you have to say oneself that one is unable to fulfill them is to injure oneself. While to say that one's ruler is unable to fulfill them is to injure one's ruler. All right, so that's the illustration. And what does it all mean? Well, it means there's some disposition to good behavior that's built into us, but it's like a seedling or sprout. It needs watering, it needs cultivation. Society needs to encourage it. Now, how do we encourage it? Well, I think two major principles you'll find in Mencius that are useful for encouraging it are a good education system and ritual, right. Propriety. This is what will cultivate that right disposition. But also, I think Mencius, when he's telling people to do this, is also advising us some of this just starts with making a good decision. You have to choose to act on it. So Mencius, like Confucius, was looking for a ruler who would listen to his principles and apply them. He never found anyone either, and passed on his teachings to his disciples for a better future. Like Confucius, Mencius thought that a stable government is established by virtue rather than by power or money. He is a strong proponent of education. He argues that government is more successful and the ruler governs by education and benevolence rather than laws and punishments. Oh, and he famously claims that a king answers to the people. Now, this is not to be assumed to correspond exactly to the ideas in, for example, John Locke in the modern Western philosophy, or to the American Declaration of Independence or anything. There is some sense in which the ruler is responsible to the people, but don't assume it corresponds to any idea you might have from what Barbie said in Toy Story 3, for example. In the first scene of the book, speaking with a particular king, you can find, if you want to, on the internet, a brief introduction to this king just by looking him up on Wikipedia. In the opening scene of this book, Mencius is talking with the king and he advises him not to speak of profit. Here's the key word on the screen here. You could also translate that word, as far as I can tell, or, well, as far as I've been able to gather from looking at sources. Benefit, interest, advantage, profit. This is the sense of the term. Mencius says he's bringing only moral teachings. He's not bringing this kind of usefulness. But he goes on to explain that talking of profit leads to great harm because it inspires selfishness and corruption. The teaching here is actually that of the great learning. Virtue is the root, wealth is the result. So what is morally right turns out to be in the long run what is also most useful. But if we seek the result rather than the root, we will get neither. So like in the great learning, Mencius is telling us things have their proper arrangement. Water the tree if you expect to see the fruit. Don't just try to get the fruit and ignore the root. The root of success is virtue. Wealth is the fruit that comes from virtue. Start with pursue things in the right order. Start with the foundation, build on the foundation, or start with the root, and the fruit comes naturally in time. All right, so this is a very memorable passage, and it's highly recommended reading in any translation. In fact, so is the next scene, also talking to the same king. Just those two anecdotes, scene 1 and scene 2. I think because I have to go do something in a few minutes, I have not very much time. I have 19 minutes to get upstairs and be ready to give some advice to some MA students on how to write a good MA dissertation. All right, so I commend scenes 1 and 2 to your reading. In the Muller translation, just click here and read this bit, followed by this bit on the marvelous pavilion. Very memorable passages. Let me see if I can just comment on these very briefly without reading any of them. Mencius sees that the king wants profit. What was that word? The king wants money and power. And he tells the king, I'm not giving you advice for that. I'm giving you advice for righteousness and benevolence. I believe the key words in this passage are going to be these two, Yan and Yi. I have counsels for those things. I don't have counsels for profit. But then in his explanation, he tells the king, if you pursue profit, you'll have all kinds of trouble. You'll have a corrupt and backstabbing kingdom. Also, you'll probably be murdered by someone. But if you pursue righteousness and justice, benevolence, kindness, Yan and Yi, you will have a successful kingdom. Now, the implication is if you want profit, you'll get it by being good. But don't pursue profit first. It's interesting to ponder what's going on here. It's like Mencius is telling the king, he actually does have advice for profit. Oh, goodness. All right. Where was I before the phone rang? It's almost like Mencius is giving the king advice for how to actually get profit. I think he is. But he says, don't speak of profit. I don't bring that. I bring righteousness, benevolence. I bring Yan Yi. I think the idea here could be construed as he's being sneaky. He's hoping the king doesn't notice. Or it could be construed as he's telling the king to be sneaky, to really want profit, but act like you want righteousness. I don't think either of these is correct. I think what he really wants is for the king to actually want virtue. And he's, as an incentive, telling the king something that's also quite true, that this is actually the way to succeed. The profit you want, you get it by being good, not by pursuing it directly. But the way to get it is not to pursue it directly, just focus on virtue in and of itself, and you will be able to achieve the profit you want in the long run. But also by then, the king won't even care about the profit because he'll be satisfied with virtue. I think something like that is the idea. It's an integration of all good things, but in the proper ordering. And the next passage, the next anecdote, talking to the same king, I think is a good illustration of a principle from Book 9 of Plato's Republic, that a virtuous person, in this case, a virtuous ruler, is the only kind who can actually be happy. The non-virtuous ruler, the evil, cruel, selfish, tyrannical ruler, is the kind whose people don't love him. And if he's bad enough, they actually want him to die. So he doesn't, he's not on good terms with the people. He is in conflict, in tension with the people. And also he's lonely, doesn't have any friends. Whereas if you are virtuous and you really care about the people, Mencius tells the king, you will actually, by sharing the good things you want out of life with the people, you will achieve the moral good of virtue, but you will also achieve happiness by being in harmony with the people. And also, you'll still that way achieve the success you want. And time is up. I really need to get out of here. So I guess you can read this probably on your own time if the screen is clearly enough capturing the text. I think I will just wrap this up by mentioning there is more than one passage in this text where Mencius gives this king or another king specific advice for how to have a benevolent Yan government. And it's very interesting. It has some correspondences to classical liberalism in the modern world and to Taoism in ancient China. And I think actually Mencius has been under some influence of Taoism. I think Mencius is a Confucian for sure, but he's on the Taoist side of the Confucian spectrum. And he advises the king to be a benevolent ruler, and it does involve some sort of public education program, from what I can tell. But mostly it's stop bothering the people, leave them alone, lay few burdens on the people with respect to laws and punishments and wars. Well, there is something about promoting responsible agriculture as well as education, but mostly a benevolent government means leave the people alone so that they're free to cultivate their farms and practice filial piety. I mean, respect and take care of their parents. And this is the sort of thing that will make the people happier and make the king happier, because he'll be a more virtuous person who's then satisfied with virtue. But it will also make him a more successful king and give him that thing he selfishly wanted in the first place: money, power, fame. Actually, every king in this stage of Chinese history basically wants to be the next emperor. This king that Mencius is talking to, when he gives him this advice, this king wants to take over one area after another around him and eventually have imperial power. He wants to be the first person of the next imperial dynasty. That's what the kings want in this era. And Mencius is telling them it's easy to do that, but you have to be virtuous. You can't just pursue that. You have to pursue virtue. And if you pursue virtue, the rest will come automatically. Again, it's the harmony of all good things, but in the proper ordering. And by the time you get it by being good, the money and power and fame you're now seeking are things you don't really even need to satisfy you, because you'll be happy by being good. And as a direct result of being good, not just as an indirect result of money, power, fame, but also you'll still get those other good things too. Icing on the cake, so to speak. These passages in the Mencius are very eloquent. Let me see if I have any time to pause the video and track down those passages for you. I have 10 minutes to get to where I need to be. Mercifully, it's only 2 floors upstairs. I don't think I need to do much before I go there. So let me pause this recording and see if I can track down 1 or 2 of those passages. Actually, I don't even need to pause the recording. I bet if I just do a Control F for the word turtle, I should find what I need. So here, if you're using the Muller translation, do a Control F keyboard shortcut for the word turtle, and not the first use of the word turtle, but the second use of the word turtle will be one of those passages. This is a passage where Mencius gives the same king a very nice, eloquent statement of what is necessary for a benevolent and successful government. By the way, mulberry trees are not primarily so we can eat the mulberries. It's because silkworms like mulberry trees, and mulberry trees give us a convenient source thereby of the materials we need to make silk clothing. Okay, so that's one of those passages. There's at least one other in the text. I don't have enough of this text in my head. Maybe there's 2 or 3 more, but there's at least one other passage where he eloquently talks about the approach to having a good government. And the emphasis is on doing less, but there are a few things like education and responsible agriculture. There are wonderful passages on this stuff. Actually, I'm going to see if I can track down one more if the word merchants turns up. So there we go. Find the first use of the word merchant in the, no, first use of the word merchant in the Muller translation. Also read the context, because this discussion of climbing a tree to catch fish is wonderful. And you'll find a nice commentary on the benefits of good government, followed by some of the basics of how to have good government. It doesn't give all exactly the same details. There's some slight divergence. Not every detail is mentioned in every passage. lots of the details overlap. All right, I'm done. This is probably the end of the series on the ancient Confucian text for now. Thanks for watching. The Mencius is highly recommended reading in any translation if you lack the ability to read in the original. So long.